And welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Tess Balbuena, COO and Interim CEO of Humans in the Loop. I'd like to start by extending a warm welcome to our esteemed guest today, Otto De Bols, founder and CEO of Segments AI. Otto, we appreciate your participation in Humans in the Loop's webinar series, and we're very thrilled to hear your insights and expertise on annotation best practices. So, Otto, would you mind kicking us off with a brief introduction?
No, yes, perfect. And good day, everyone. I think good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. I think I see still a lot of people continuing to join the call, but indeed happy to already kick things off. A bit my background, I did my PhD together with Bert in machine learning and computer vision and signal processing. And then basically together we launched Segments.ai. And with Segments, we basically built labeling tooling for self-driving use cases, autonomy use cases. So specifically self-driving vehicles and any, in general, self-driving robots. We work with self-driving car companies. We work with self-driving truck companies, self-flying drones, self-driving floating submarines, self-driving mowing machines, and everything in between them, right? And that's indeed a bit our focus, and of course, and I think we'll talk a bit about that as well. That goes pretty deep, right? And so we built quite advanced tooling.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Otto. Submarine. That's the first time I've heard submarine in machine learning. That's pretty interesting and pretty cool. And
Yes.
right. Okay. So before we start, for our audience and for those who have just joined us, it would be great if you could share where you're joining us from. It'd be interesting to know, which part of the world we're trying to reach through this webinar. And also, please feel free to ask your questions via the Q&A window. All right? So I think we're good to go. So just a bit of perhaps let's call it an icebreaker. I'd like to start, Otto, because obviously in this industry right now, I hear generative AI. It's almost like a buzzword, and there's no day that passes by that I don't hear this generative AI. So what are your thoughts on generative AI, and if this has had, say, any significant impact on the dev side from your team?
On the dev side of our team specifically, I think first of all, I think everyone sees that generative AI setup is quite phenomenal, right? And there's even more than, I think what's even more exciting than the use cases of what it supports already today is the progress that it's making, has made over the past years, and what it can still continue to do in the next years. I think people were fallen off of ChatGPT mainly starting last year. Of course, it was already active since a long time, but it hit basically the public mainly last year. But right now, thinking of text-to-video use cases like Sora, also from OpenAI, it's remarkable where we are, right, and what we can continue to still to work on and to do in the near future. How that affects not specifically indeed our business. Your question, I think, more on our engineering side. And for example, indeed our dev team, each one of them uses Gen AI solutions. Then of course mainly for coding, right? Such as Copilot and some others. And that is drastically helping with improving efficiency. Right? I think we see that, and it's even becoming a basically interview question whenever we like people to join us. That basically prerequisite is to be able to use such tools to your own benefit, right? And that's pretty exciting of seeing how that's evolving. Right? Yeah. Do you see something on your side, Tess, as well? In your team?
We do, and we get a lot of questions about around it, and also I think mostly because we deal with a lot of image annotation. A lot of our clients and also even prospective clients are are fascinated by, like the technology around, let's say, SAM, for example. But sometimes, the lack of understanding around it as well is also causing a bit of a challenge. And so therefore you have to also give them a bit of an orientation that, SAM is not the be all and end all of data annotation, that it could also, provide or yield some inaccurate results. But again, obviously there's still a lot of education that needs to go around it, I suppose. So yeah, I think, yeah.
I think maybe talking about Sam briefly, and don't want to hijack obviously the webinar, but there's often need, if we talk with customers and prospects, there's often questions like, hey, have you already integrated SAM, right? And can we already leverage SAM, right? And that's a valid question, right? But we think of speeding up, and then SAM is obviously typically used for speed up labeling. We think of it as a couple of steps, right? And maybe instead of just talking about it, maybe let me share my screen.
Sure. But you're right, it does help. It does help, but like I said, it still needs human input, I would say.
Of course, yes. And so, I mean, there's no labeling setup right now that's perfectly automated, right? Because that would mean that you basically have the model that you're training with that labeled data. So there's the chicken and the egg issue there. Can you already use automation in the loop? Obviously, a lot of our customers are already doing pretty well on that front, but a lot are indeed stepping into it and are trying to understand where they can get to. I think there it's important to first try to walk before starting to run, right? And I think I mainly think it in this way. If I can explain my logic, if obviously if you wait, let me do. Oh, yeah, I like to use Excalibur. I think it's a fantastic tool to be able to
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
explain some reasoning. So so let's say you're on the path to automation, right, and speeding up the labeling and basically increasing the throughput and function of each additional hour of manual inputs of a person. I think that there's a couple of things, right? I think number one, the first step is I mean, obviously let's start from this is just a manual labeling part, right? That's a manual label. Is this clear, Tess? Is this large enough?
Yeah. It's perfect.
Cool.
It's perfect.
I think then the second part is indeed what people have been noticing, and it's been around in the market already for a long time. Of course, is basically, let's say, ML powered labeling tooling. Right. What does that mean? That means if you're a labeler, you're using specific tooling that is ML machine learning powered or AI fueled or whatever buzzword you want to use, and that basically you get additional aids. Yeah, instead of labeling the borders, you get additional aids to easily and quicker and more accurate label borders of objects and the like. Right. So that's machine learning powered labeling tooling. Yeah. SAM has some use cases here. SAM, you can implement SAM in a couple of different ways. You can indeed implement with a kind of machine learning powered labeling tooling in such a flow, right? And I think then the next step, if you're going beyond that and say like, hey, but we want to kick it like one step further, you need to then go towards what we call model assisted labeling. Yeah. Which means, let me first write this out for those that are interested, model assisted labeling. This basically means that you use a model that already predicts what you try to label. And then the taskers are then rather not labeling from scratch with some help, but rather correcting the predictions. So that's basically different from a machine learning powered labeling tooling strategy, right? That's really going towards a really humans in the loop workflow where you have models who are already predicting and providing pre-labels. And of course, those models can be the same models as the customers eventually are building or want to build for eventual deployment. Or those could be other models that are more directed towards labeling, right? For example, models with larger latency who can be more powerful. For deployment, you might need small and low latency models, but for labeling purposes, could be a much larger model with a lot more parameters, right? That's a bit generally how I think of it, and then you could even deep dive even further, right? I think there's in model assisted labeling, you could basically have a very generic setup, yeah, of any large scale setup, which would be SAM. Yeah, SAM currently, if you use it, it's a enormous large scale model by itself, right? I think then you could say maybe the second, if you think about it, the second kind of additional focus on fine tuning would be basically, let's say, a use case specific fine tuning of SAM or of any other setup. And for example, street scenery, automotive, right? Or then what we mainly work with nowadays with our customers, those that are, let's say, already mature or on the path to be mature, is a bit of the third and final one is then a customer specific version, right? Basically their models that they're training, that they're then uploading, and that then, for example, on segments.ai, and that then the workforce is rather correcting. Yeah. And then in this way, I think that if you're following this trajectory, you take it step by step, I think I could do something super nice. As such. Yeah. I hope that was clear, Tess.
It's crystal, yeah, and I love the illustration. So it's fantastic. It gives me a really good overview of
Cool.
yeah. So maybe we can delve into moving the conversation towards, like, obviously you have that process and that structure in the way you think about, how do we build the process or manage the process. Maybe we can talk about the collaboration and partnership in annotation. So I suppose I'd like to understand, maybe in your opinion, because often as a service provider ourselves, we often hear from customers that, let's say, they prefer a one-stop shop provider. What does that mean exactly from your perspective, Otto?
I think good question. And maybe thinking about it, let me reshare my screen again. And I just was thinking about maybe showing something.
Sure.
So Bert, our CTO, he gave a talk last year at ICRA robotics conference in London. That was this year. It's in Japan. You can meet us there as well in May. But so he basically gave a talk, and we wrote it up in the blog posts, and so everyone can see it on our website. Basically, but describing the next steps towards the path to full automation, specifically on multi-sensor setups, right? So let's say at any time that you have basically multiple cameras, maybe one or more lidars, and then you need to label that and get it labeled typically jointly, typically with consistent IDs. That's something that we can help with. Is basically what you also like to automate, right? And really go towards early fusion. And people can have a look in the blog post. There's a couple of things that we show of features that we have and things that we're working on, which make it very exciting with projection steps, with even actually some own diffusion models that we're training, which is also basically a sub part of Gen AI, right? Some voxel grids discussions and the like, right? So that's it's just something I thought of on the previous question. Regarding maybe then the one-stop shop, I think it's not something that is my opinion, right? I think it's basically the definition would be that it's a single entity or single vendor that a customer can walk towards and basically send data to, send instructions to, and get it back labeled. Yeah. After a while, maybe the day after, or maybe weeks after, or months after, but just that's basically the setup, right? And so I think especially in our use case, that's changing a bit. It could still be such a setup, but typically in kind of multi-sensor use case with robotics and autonomy use cases, it's not an easy problem, right? It's not like you have a labeling problem where you just need to classify cats versus dogs. Right? Generally, a lot of people know the difference between a cat and a dog. Yeah, so then there's also generally, except for some edge cases, rarely a discussion of what a cat is and what a dog is, right? But so in multi-sensor use cases, that becomes very, very difficult. Number one. Number two, the tooling is also pretty much advanced, and so indeed, in let's say a bit more of a standard. Oh, let me move here. Yeah, let's maybe change the color of it. You could say basically the computer vision engineering team from the customer, right? Let's make it a bit bigger. Do it like this. Basically, indeed, before what we noticed a lot before was in talks with indeed a labeling vendor, and typically it was indeed a workforce, right? So a labeling workforce, and typically the labeling workforce for some easy use cases used indeed some open source tooling, or the need for some more advanced use cases then reverted to indeed a labeling tooling provider, right? And then that's basically then, let's say, the relationship, and maybe let's finish this one over here as such. And so this would generally be, let's say, a bit considered also as a one-stop shop. Either the tooling is part of the workforce company, right? And there's some in the world, or it's still separate, but then still the engineering team only has, let's say, one point of contact with the workforce team. But then recently we start to see that shifting a bit. We start to basically see a bit where the tooling provider, given and need the, let's say, more advanced use cases that we're working with, is that the tooling provider is basically then also in touch directly with the computer vision engineering team. Again, because it's a more advanced problem. The data itself, onboarding the data is more, it takes more effort, right? And that's indeed a bit the typical setup that we nowadays see, and that actually nowadays works very well, right? As such, yeah.
Right. Sorry, I was muted. But yeah, so typically, when they say one-stop shop, they want both the tooling and the workforce to come as a package, right?
Yeah.
And there's very few, at least in my understanding, there's very few platforms or tooling that have the workforce or the capacity even to, let's say, scale up if it's a massive project. So therefore, that's when the concept of, collaboration happens. Like, for example, us and you guys, I mean, we've collaborated on some pilot projects before. So I think that's where it really works, because we can bring in, obviously, on the quality side of things, we can monitor and manage that. But on the side of the technical side of things, obviously, the tooling outfit, or in your case, let's say Segments AI, can manage all of the dev and the tech side of things. So
yeah, because I think because if you think about it, and I think that's still something that also from our side takes some effort in explaining to customers, is that building tooling for labeling and operating workforces for labeling, especially at large scale, are two completely different skill sets. And takes a completely different approach, takes a completely different way of building the team, takes different type of people. And so in any case, even if you have everything in one basically shop, let's say, still there's a difference between both parts of it. And typically there are walls between them. And so why then indeed then, I mean, that's a bit my personal opinion. And of course I'm talking a bit in favor of our setup, of course, but that's something I'm personally convinced of as well. Is that you then better try to find the best of both worlds,
no,
right?
fair
And
enough.
try to
Fair
find the
enough.
best
And
tooling, and
each,
that's works for us.
each entity brings in their own strengths as well. So I understand, but I think that's not like a biased opinion. But can I also just just a bit of a sidebar topic, because I hear this terminology a lot as well. Black box labeling, right? So can you maybe explain or give us a bit of an understanding of what black box labeling is?
So I fair question. I think typically I think it's also changing, right? I think it's not necessary to say that typically one-stop shop providers, that it's all, let's say, the black box labeling. I think there's, everyone understands that it needs to have a bit more involvement in that. But the general, let's say, the definition of black box labeling would be what I described as in, you provide a vendor your raw data, you provide the instructions, you say go, you give them a deadline, it comes back labeled after a couple of weeks, couple of months, and that's it, right? Maybe initially you align on some initial parts of what needs to be done, but then that's it, and they go and you get it back labeled. that's indeed generally a bit what black box labeling is, and I think that is something that we, at least for segments, and I think with in our pilots that we worked with you as well, is something that we notice just doesn't really work, especially again not on more advanced use cases. And so that's a bit what we actively try to work against as such. Yeah.
Okay.
Should I maybe deep dive a bit in some
No, no, no,
examples
no,
what
no,
we
no,
try
no.
to do
I
from our
get
side?
it, but it's essentially what you're saying is that it's not something that you would advocate for because it's not really, in your experience at least, it's not an effective or efficient way of doing things. But I also maybe want to dig deeper in terms of feedback loops because also this is a challenge for a lot of of our projects or when we're working or collaborating with the platform. So maybe can you share with me a few best practices for effective communication and feedback loops?
Yeah, I think I mean, of course, I think if communication is not needed, then it's the best, right? If you don't have to talk with each other and the team can just work, then that's the best, right? And I think often we're working mainly with computer vision engineering teams. And
Yeah.
so engineers, they love to code, right? They don't love to talk, they like to code. And it's something that we all need to appreciate, right? It's I think just the fact that you can set up a rhythm where you understand where you can communicate and there's room to, let's say, collaborate is important. And if you talk indeed about some best practices that you asked, I think there's indeed some general check-in meetings, right? Not necessarily weekly, it could be monthly, but just optionally, right? That, hey, look, let's just check in for 5 minutes. Hey, this is a throughput. These are the edge cases that we noticed. Let's just quickly discuss that, right? And that's it. Yeah. Typically, let's say in the pre-definition of black box labeling, something that you don't have, right? Continuous feedback loops indeed is to what is helpful there is also to improve specifications, of the labeling. So labeling guidelines. I think let me maybe quickly open an example. I need to open. Yeah, here we go. This, for example, is a template that we built for our customers, for our prospects, for them to indeed already start to indicate what they like in for the labeling guidelines, right? And as you see, it's pretty exhaustive, right? And so we asked typically indeed of obviously what needs to be labeled, but also some general labeling rules, some very specific labeling rules. And of course, that's not something that you need to already provide upfront. We provide some, if you see that these columns here, some default answers, default assumptions of how we suggest the team to continue. But this is something that we live work with and that we actually refine together then with, again, the engineering team and the workforce provider, right? And just sharing also our expertise. And it's, I think, the best feedback loops that can happen, right? And kind of a live.
Oh, I love this.
live
You
flash.
you mentioned exhaustive, but the more exhaustive, the better, because obviously it will give you a better understanding of the requirements. But sometimes, you mentioned earlier as well that, the ideal scenario is that if there's no communication, then that's perfect. If we don't need to have meetings and all that kind of stuff, that's perfect. But also, I cannot stress the importance of this type of document. Having a detailed and comprehensive specs or guidelines really drives obviously the result in making sure that you have everything that
All
you
good,
need.
Tess?
Yeah, all good in terms of the information that you need. So yeah, I love it.
Perfect. No, yeah, indeed. I think that like feedback loops, you can have various feedback loops on everything, right? This is a feedback loop that you could set up on the specification guidelines. There's feedback loops indeed on you could say feature usages, right?
Yeah.
We on our team, we're continuously building new features. Typically, our roadmap is driven by customer requests.
Yep.
We just recently had 2 or 3 really large scale pilots for 3D segmentation labeling. 3D segmentation is basically labeling point clouds.
Yep.
Where you're labeling each individual point of a point cloud. Point clouds themselves are already pretty large. If you label sequences, what you want to do, you want to merge them together. That generates point clouds of millions of points. Well, through our customers, we were really pushed to build, which we launched last week, a feature to merge all point clouds together from the entire sequence, so you can label everything in one view of an entire video, right? Without needing to flip
That's the
between
sample that
frames.
you showed earlier, right? That's the LiDAR sample that you showed earlier.
Yes,
Yeah,
indeed,
yeah,
indeed, and
yeah.
then really merged then together, and a really large scene. And that's something that we actively work with the customers to really refine and to also regarding tooling, we really work with the customers to build better tooling also for them, right? That's a feedback loop on that. And indeed, we had some great success with that. There's some teams coming back after a couple of weeks of like noticing that there is some edge cases in those data sets. For example, a company building autonomous robots to basically for yard operations. So let's say large supermarket stores in the US with large tractor, basically fulfillment center, large fulfillment centers with a lot of trucks, right? Where you want to autonomously move the trucks and position them better. There they notice a lot of different types of cones. And those all then eventually need to be labeled differently and be subclassified. And so in typical kind of black box labeling, nothing would go pass by. I mean, right, and after a couple of months you get back all labeled as cones, and then you get back and say like, yeah, but actually it makes more sense to label it like in a couple of different subcategories, right? And so that's a bit what we really want to avoid as well. Yeah.
Perfect. So speaking of that example, that the LiDAR annotation, and because you said that this was all merged, right? But I think you also mentioned that you were very successful in this endeavor, in this particular project. So how do you ensure the quality of that type of project, especially in the autonomous vehicles or autonomy annotation system? How do you ensure the quality of that? How were you successful in making sure that the quality is, spot on?
So again, I think you need to take the approach of splitting QA as in the involvement of tooling, what the tooling can do to improve QA. And then also second, what the workforce can do for QA, right? And again, our bread and butter is building tooling. Your bread and butter is the workforce side of things. I can speak to the tooling side of things indeed, and so that's indeed, as mentioned, tight feedback loops, that's platform features such as communication and issues and the like.
Can you also mention maybe, Otto, any specific challenges around, annotating data, especially in the context of autonomous vehicles or robotics?
Of course, I think so again, mentioned cats versus dogs, that's pretty clear, right? It's pretty clear use case. If you then go towards, and it's street scenery data, other outdoor data, indoor data, we really really need to build use cases for perception and autonomy. There's a lot more variability, and there's more variability on what needs to be labeled, on what you can see in the data, on the type of structure of the data. Is it camera images? Is it point cloud data? There are technical issues if you think about point cloud data of lidars. Of they need to do ego motion compensation, and you have spinning lidars, right? So there's not always a perfect synchronization. So that's obviously, let's say, the context of all the challenges that come from it. And again, I showed the spec document, and that's just one example of how versatile labeling such projects is. And that personally excites me as well, because every customer that you see pass by, it's a different project, has different specs that also then again require different platform features, right? And so there's one customer that wants to do lane line labeling on point clouds and with images calibrated to the background and whatnot. But then there's another one who also wants to do lane line labeling, but in a completely different way. And that then again requires different platform features, and that personally excites us, but makes it, of course, also a bit more difficult. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm also going to touch on the subject of data privacy and security, if you don't mind, Otto, because obviously this is a concern as well for all of us in the industry, and then especially obviously last year, the EU AI Act being approved, and obviously it will start being effective soon. So, what steps need to be taken to ensure the privacy and the security of data during annotation process, especially considering the sensitive nature of some of this data?
Good question. I think, I mean, again, there's only so much things that the labeling tooling and labeling workforce providers can do, that there's a lot of responsibility, obviously, on the customers as well. We often get requests of anonymizing the data for the customers. But of course, customers could also try to do that themselves as well, right? But again, we're happy to help there. But then if you think a bit deeper, I think that there's a lot of responsibility as well as in how your infrastructure is set up, and how the engineers think about safeguarding the data, and how you give labelers access and the tooling provider access to the data and the like, right? And I'm thinking of how to phrase it, and maybe again, let me maybe share my I'm gonna share my screen right now. I am. You could how we like to set it up, and a bit our default setup of again some more mature customers, is that when we provide tooling, we at this point in time always provide cloud hosted tooling. It's a cloud platform. And indeed, we get a lot of questions from customers are like, "Ooh, a cloud platform. We need to keep our data safe, right?" Fully understood. It doesn't mean that because we have a cloud platform that your data is indeed up for grabs in the public on public spaces, right? Our setup is a bit differently, and maybe I could maybe show it like this, where basically, and then this maybe gets a bit more technical, but it's I think important to explain, where on segments.ai, basically we then have our, let's say, segments.ai backends, right? This is basically our database where everything is running, right? But then how we integrate with the customers is that, and let me clean this a bit up, right? My mother always told me to clean things up, so there we
As they
go.
do.
As they do. So here we go. And then, so indeed, then the computer vision engineering team then could still keep the data on their buckets. Let's say the customer bucket. And so in this way, what we do with our backend, we actually then store not the data of the customers, we actually store references to the data on the server of the customer. Now, and so the data is still in their buckets. For example, AWS S3 or GCP or in Azure buckets, or on their own personal servers, perfectly possible as well. And then how then the labeling workforce is then leveraging this is indeed then when a labeler basically opens the our platform, they're loading our front ends in. They are basically requesting the URL that we store in our database, and that basically pings then the bucket of the customer, and then this let's do like this. Then actually the image or the point cloud is then loaded on the browser of the task, right? In this way, the data is generally stored on the customer buckets. It doesn't need to go directly. The workforce doesn't need to download zip files and install tooling and the like. They just load it in their browser. You can provide some further indeed security measures and constraints there as well. So it's generally a good setup, right? And that's typically how we try to safeguard and answer any questions regarding privacy and security. And obviously we're also ISO 27001 certified, and there's also a lot of processes around there. But we generally see this to be best practice. If you don't want to continue with, we can also help with on-premise setups. But that's of course a totally bit of a different beast, right? It requires different requirements, different efforts, and so this is still a very decent setup.
Very good illustration. It works out well with your first illustration and the second illustration. So crystal clear. And thanks for sharing that. And I also want to get into the part where we talk about, obviously, in any project, there's always that demand for, quick turnaround times, timelines, efficiency. But then there's also a huge, importance and focus on quality, right?
Yeah.
So I guess my question would be, how do you balance the need for speed and efficiency in annotation with the need for quality and accuracy?
Good point. Again, speaking merely from my personal experience, merely being a labeling tooling provider, you feel free to share some lights on your side as well, Tess. But I think what we've seen pass by in the plethora of different projects that we've seen on our platform is that there's a need always a trade-off between quality and throughput. The best practice, what I always push for is to, number one, first work on the quality and make sure to really get to the quality that you require. Maybe first of all, define what quality is, what you jointly see as quality. Maybe attach some metrics to that, try to get there as a quality level, and then see what your throughput is. And then maybe from that, then with the same quality, try to improve your throughput. Because of how can you improve that? Just with just because of the learning curve, right? Labelers doing the same things are gonna get better and gonna get quicker. Number two, then for the same quality, you can build better features. You can use different tools, and just with a stable quality, then improve the throughput. I think we also see, obviously, we're also part of RFPs and RFQs and those parts. And just recently today, I got a pricing request in as well. And then it's the first thing is always throughput. And it's asked like, hey, how long does it take you to label this type of data? And how much does it cost for 1,000 frames? And how much does it cost for 10,000 frames and 100,000 frames and whatnot, right? And then at the end, there's then a point of like, okay, and so what is the percentage of accuracy that you can obtain? And there's that one field that needs to be filled in of like a percentage. I think that's a bit indeed, again, we're a bit biased because we're really in advanced use cases. But if you think of street scenery, there's not such thing as an accuracy percentage. You need to first define what you see as accuracy. Is it on the size of the tightness of the cuboids? Is it the class, the category accuracy, whatnot? It's just not a specific percentage. So then that's, I think, typically in RFPs and RFQs, the best flow that we see is first to indeed have a free pilot. We work together. There's some data from the customer loaded. There's some alignment on the accuracy. The team is labeling the data, following certain throughput, and then the RFP can be filled in. And we can say like, hey, together with the workforce, we see that we need these tools, these features, we need this kind of workflow.
Makes sense.
We can meet the quality, and that's at this kind of price point, right? That's it. And I think that's best practice, and that's how we've won a lot of different projects, because I think it shows confidence and experience as well, right?
Terrific.
Rather than the other way around. I'm not sure
terrific.
if you see the same, Tess.
Yeah. I mean, and we actually do exactly the same process as you guys, but obviously we're not a tooling company, but we also manage projects and approaches the way you just mentioned. So there's not a lot of differences there, but I guess we can move the conversation towards now around the contribution of annotation platforms such as you guys to ethical AI, because this is also, again, another buzzword, right? Ethical AI, you hear it every day, you hear it a lot, but I suppose I'd like to know, what would your own definition of ethical AI be?
You say you hear it every day. Are you referring maybe to the launch of Gemini last week or 2 weeks ago, or?
Well, but yeah, let's put it this way. Like, everyone just uses this as like, we have to make sure that it's ethical and all that, but is everyone really practicing ethical AI? That's a big question mark. And are there, processes and regulations in place? Again, that begs the question. But again, in the EU, it's a different story, because now we are all, obviously obligated to comply with the EU AI Act. I just don't know if our counterparts in North America would have the same sort of regulations, coming up in the woodworks. I don't know, but anyway, in your own definition, what is ethical AI, and what is the contribution of Segment's AI, or maybe in general the annotation platforms around, making it like conscientiously contributing to ethical AI?
Indeed. So I think in general, what ethical AI was ethical AI. I think, of course, it touches on how models are working, how they're implemented, right? Again, as we've seen with the debate from last week's. But indeed, if we focus on, I think indeed that's a bit maybe your question of ethical AI in the labeling business, right? And the like.
Yeah.
I should play that back to you, Tess. If I mean, there's a couple of things what I would see. There's of course questions around monetary rewards, operational comfort, and the like. But maybe that's what do you see around that yourself?
Yeah, and in our case, for us, we obviously, because the nature of our business has a social mission, right? So we help contribute towards ethical AI. We have actually helped several companies support their annotation or data labeling projects, making their systems more diverse, bias-free, and inclusive, therefore contributing to a more ethical data output. We also ensure that the nature of this data that we're processing does not really affect the well-being and the psychosocial state of our annotators and workforce. So that's very important to us as well. So therefore, making sure that by avoiding sometimes the attraction and the opportunity and incentive around getting a big contract or project, but it sort of like crosses the line between what's ethical and not, is also you have to really make that decision as a company with a social mission. So my answer to that is that we always make sure and we put ethics in the forefront of everything, and making sure that we don't really get ourselves into agreeing to any data processing for data that is doesn't fall in that ethical category.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. I think again back indeed to like indeed what you could see in it and then ethical eye. Thinking about it, I need to say the monetary rewards aspect, right? Getting paid properly, let's say. So I need operation comfort, as you say, to receiving sufficient support also for mental health, well-being, as you say. Personal growth, maybe I'd say. I think that there's a need the entire gig economy in the labeling setup where people are as like second and third jobs doing some labeling efforts. I think, of course, there's some advantages to that of providing additional work opportunity. At the same time, I think we need to make sure to provide people who are labeling proper training as well, right? It's I think a mentally stressy job. I think we need to make it sufficiently rewarding as well, right? And I think at the same time, opportunities for people with different backgrounds. I think in general, I think the business of labeling has provided a lot of opportunities. I think no one can deny that. I think it's a question of how to implement it well and to need to address it properly, right?
Yeah. Agreed. So maybe we can also that's a segue for us to speak a little bit about because I noticed we've got 15 minutes left and we have to make room as well for questions. So I want to maybe touch on one last subject, which is the selection or selecting an annotation provider. So my question to you is, Otto, when you speak to clients, what's the criteria that you see that commonly appear when computer vision engineering teams select annotation providers? What's the criteria that most are looking for?
I think, again, speaking from our business and multi-sensor setups, number one is experience. And this is no doubt the number one. I think that's why we now in the past 4 years of really focusing on this are now getting into a setup where most people know us, and where we are basically one of the first to be contacted to help them out. So I think that's number one, and then that's both from a tooling perspective as well as from a workforce perspective, right? I think being able to show that you've labeled these type of project, number one, to be able to show that you used that type of tooling, I think is very important. Number two, what we notice as well is open communication, being super transparent, both on the way of working as well as on pricing as well. We try to keep a super simple pricing model, sometimes even too simple, right? But that's what we focus on as well.
Okay.
And then of course third there could also be indeed some other things that we sometimes hear, and you just mentioned the ethical standards. We don't have that much experience from that side of we generally don't see indeed. I mean, it's on the tooling side of things, not a criteria for which the providers are being selected, but
fair enough.
Maybe Tess, you can speak a bit more.
Yeah.
I think you see
So
some things possible.
yeah, from my perspective, because I didn't want to jump on this earlier when we were talking about your own definition of ethical standards, because I wanted it to come from your perspective as a tooling outfit, right? So, but from our perspective, because as you know, and for the benefit of our audience at the moment, we are an impact sourcing service provider. So, as an impact sourcing service provider, we have to train and upskill our workers with the advanced tools and trends in data annotation, and equip them with the knowledge of gold standards and ethical standards of the annotation industry. So therefore, the quality of the data or output that we produce is significantly higher than that of your typical, crowdsourcing platforms out there. And like I mentioned earlier, we've also supported several companies, and helped contribute towards making their AI systems and models, more diverse, bias-free, ethical, and also inclusive. Additionally, as a service provider with a social mission, we have methodologies for recruiting and managing our workforce, which are made up of people affected by conflict. Our beneficiaries are constantly provided with task supervision as well as career development opportunities. And lastly, if we're talking about fair treatment of workforce and people, it's our beneficiaries are also guaranteed with dignified working conditions and remuneration for each of the project that they work on. We have a very strict fair pay policy that complies with minimum payment standards to ensure the livelihood and the well-being of our workforce. So I guess in summary, I would say choosing an impact sourcing and data labeling provider, as we are, is a brilliant and noble way, I suppose, for clients to create a social impact while obtaining high quality work or high quality data.
Yeah.
That's
I think that's maybe also for the viewers. I think that's something also that we can vouch for as on our platform. If we work with workforce providers, that's always indeed full-time labeling teams such as the Humans in the Loop team. We rarely work with crowdsourced setups, merely also from this kind of ethical perspective and just what we also see from quality, right?
Yeah.
Point.
Yeah.
Again, cats versus dogs. Maybe you could try it. Labeling dusts with segmentation labeling in 3D point clouds.
Yeah. different story.
different
Yeah,
story.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, different story. All right. Well, look, I think we've come to the almost the conclusion of this session, but we would like to open the room now for some of the questions that we've received from our audience. Let me see here. Do we have a question that I can't see the questions right now. Wait.
I mean, neither.
Okay, give me a second. Let me try and open that. So there's one here. Okay, so how are quality control and error correction handled in the annotation process for automotive systems?
How is quality? Can you repeat the
Yeah,
first part of the
how
question?
are quality control and error correction handled in the annotation process for automotive systems?
Got it. I think that's I mean, is it for automotive systems for others? I think then that's a bit more generic. Then the question of how to implement is different. But so there's a couple of different things, right? Number one is some general communication things. No, actually, the first thing is being able to have reviewing workflows on the tooling, right? And obviously on segments AI, we have those. So where indeed you can have QA people who can review, you have the customer who can then additionally verify, and that's the entire indeed QA reviewing pipelines and workflows, right? Number two is the need being able to additionally communicate, having what we call issues, like commenting functionality, being able to specifically pinpoint to a certain annotation on a certain frame, be very specific. That's basically the second part. Now, of course, people could wonder, yes, but I mean, for automotive, you have huge data sets, right? And so are you expecting customers to go through each one of them? Obviously not, right? So mainly it's the task of the workforce to provide good quality, right? Number one, obviously. But that's why we're also now building what we call a kind of warning tab, allowing actually our customers to build a type of linting system where the engineers of the customers can already provide some specific deterministic rules and rule sets that already capture issues upfront, right? For example, if a cuboid is suddenly enlarging more than 20% from one frame to another, that's flagged. Yeah. So that the laborer can go back and see like, hey, what happened here? Was that a mistake or is that fine? Or for example, when a cuboid is let's say too much below ground, or when a segmentation mask has multiple blobs, right? Should certainly be a single entity, right? Those kind of things. And then needs finally, the more mature customers are really using models in the loop, also for quality assurance, where they indeed then they use models to provide pre-labels. Labelers are correcting those, but then they have other models who immediately check, hey, look, is that generally fine? Is there still some issues that can be spotted automatically with some, again, very customer specific models in the loop, right? And that's a bit, let's say, the flow. I could have drawn this out as well, but for the sake of time, those are like the different steps that we have on our platform and that we typically see our from less mature to more mature companies go through as well, right?
Yep.
Again, and then with all the feedback loop discussion that we had in the past of like how to work with a workforce is definitely critical.
Perfect. Thank you for that really great answer. But I think we have time for one more, right? So we've got 6 minutes left. So I'm gonna share this question with you, Otto. So in light of the current trends in the AI landscape, like we just talked about generative AI, in the field of supervised machine learning and data labeling particularly, do you see this uh, supervised or manual labeling uh, process to be facing a potential decline in the coming years, given the technology? What's your take on that?
Good question. Will there be let's say, relative less need for labeling for specific use cases? Yes. Because indeed, if you go towards more mature setups, if you go indeed to a bit more unsupervised setups for some use cases, then you'll need less labeling. However, what people often forget is, again, we're working in the more advanced setups. That's not easily managed in a very unsupervised manner. Number two, if you have a look at Tesla actually last week launched their beta of their new full self-driving functionality,
Yeah,
which
but
is
at the
actually
same time,
fully
they're
end-to-end.
recalling a lot of cars in California.
True, but okay, they at least they're trying, right? At least
Yeah,
they're trying.
yeah,
But at least they're trying. But indeed, it's a shift from and it's supervised to unsupervised of a full end-to-end
yeah.
tech stack. But Andrzej Karpathy, also the former head of AI at Tesla, also clearly mentioned of like, hey, we had to go through the massive hoops of labeling large data sets to build our first models to be able to go to indeed a kind of end-to-end approach, right? Plus, and still, what we don't need to forget is yesterday we also were on a call with a big automotive company who needed indeed labeling for validation data sets. And so they later as well training, but they're specifically now they were looking for a solution for validation data sets. Second, we're working with a customer in the UK as well who needs to label a significantly large data sets for validation purposes, really because of the government forcing them to.
Oh, yeah.
And so really for official reasons. And so that there's various use cases where you still need to label at least
Yeah,
some. You still need to have a tool.
yeah,
And that's something that we're just personally convinced in as well, and what we see also from our customers as well. And we've been
yeah.
growing steadily in the past years, and we don't see a decline because of the need to push to kind of more unsupervised manner.
That's an optimistic answer. I love it. I've got one more.
Well,
Sorry,
no, I mean
Otto.
optimistic. I'd say realistic, right? We gave the introduction. I think
Realistic.
maybe
Let's put it.
on training data sets, you could imagine it needs to be less with more automation.
Yeah,
But yes,
yeah. So I guess both realistic and optimistic. But right. So we've got one more question just came in. What are the benefits of early fusion as opposed to labeling different types of data separately?
good question as well. It's a pretty advanced question as well. I think where we sometimes also see some very mature customers and some customers that we also a little bit help to educate on as well. Again, what I think where the question is getting to is most of the customers nowadays are labeling or might have multiple sensors, but they're labeling them individually, and then they're doing late fusion, which means they train models on each of those sensors individually, and then they try to merge the predictions. Like some sensors say, there's a car, another sensor says there's no car, and then they need to make a decision of like, is there a car or not, right? That's a
Yeah.
late fusion approach. And early fusion needs us where actually you're gonna label the entire data set together. You're gonna label a car on all of those sensors together with the same ID, consistent ID across sensors across time. You then train one holistic model, maybe on the individual sensors, or maybe first convert it to kind of voxel grid and occupancy grid of voxel representation, and then you train a single model. And that's early fusion. And so advantages, there's significant advantages, right? To have a look again at the Tesla approach. There's better quality. You need less labeled data for the same quality. You can also do much better tracking as well of objects through the scene. There's if cars are occluded, you can still capture them very well in the output of your models, and the like, right? So it's just basically a next step in the typical model or like ML journey that our customers are going through.
Fantastic. All right. Well, you answered that question right on time, spot on. We have 1 minute left, so I suppose it's time to wrap up. I have to say, if we didn't get to your questions for our audience, we'll get to it and we'll send an answer via email. But Otto, I had a terrific time on this webinar. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to you and your insights on industry best practices and your journey in building and constantly enhancing your tool have been invaluable. And to our audience as well, thank you for joining us today. Your participation through your questions has enriched this conversation and shown, I guess, a collective commitment to continuous improvement within our industry. But please remember, these best practices that Otto has shared with us obviously are not a one-size-fits-all solution, but rather I guess, a springboard for innovation and adaptation tailored to your specific needs. So for those of you who would like to find out more about Segments AI, please feel free to reach out through their website or book a meeting with their team. And please reach out to us, Humans in the Loop, on LinkedIn. And we encourage you to register for our next webinar series to continue learning about data annotation and similar topics. So thank you once again, Otto, and to all of
Thank
you.
you, Tess.
Thank you
Thank you,
very
Tess, and the
much.
team.
And to
Thanks
your
for
team,
hosting these. Thanks for hosting these series. I think this is
we
has always been
appreciate it. We love having
very
you. Come
very
back,
thoughtful.
please. Come back maybe sometime around Q2 or Q3. But
Yeah.
we hope you found this webinar informative, everyone, and we look forward to connecting with all of you again soon. Have a good one. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.
Yes.